Okay, hello. Picking up where we left off, we're going to now start the room transitions. So in my tiled software, I've just changed the level layouts a bit. If you look up here, I've got two more levels, or rooms, as we can call them. So this is the first one, which was a bit familiar. I've added exit points here, and that's room 0. And I've also added an extra object layer called exits. So we've got entries, let's put that there, entries and exits. So my entries we've used before. 0 is where the player goes. And here we've got entry point 3, I've called it, and entry point 1. If we move over a little bit here. And then the exits, we've got boxes that we can collide with. So if I go to exits, if I click that, exits is highlighted, shows me what layer it's in. That's the entry layer. This is the exit layer, and that exit is called 1, and this one is called 3. So what I want to happen is if the player collides with exit 1, I want it to go to that map to the entry point of the next level. So if we look at this level 1 or room 1, we'll use them interchangeably. I always keep saying level for some reason. So level 1 here is more vertical one where you'd enter in from the left at position 1. And then I'm going to use a dictionary to tell it exactly what room number to go to. Obviously, this is room number 1. I was using strings for level and room names before, but I built quite a lot together making my game, and it got a bit confusing remembering what rooms I called what. So I think numbering it is better, and then just drawing yourself a little map. You can use this world function and sort of put them together, but I find this easier just having them open as you're working on them. And you're not going to overwrite things by saving and things, which I've done before. You can just save them individually. Otherwise, it can really screw up your project. I've spent a lot of time overwriting things here by accident. So this is that. And as we go down the bottom here, once we've gone into this room, we can come here to exit 2. And if I go to room 2 here, so I've got 3 rooms, 0, 1 and 2. And that will take me to this room from this side at entry point 2. Remember, we exited at 2 in this exit box here. So we should come out here at 2. Let's move this a bit closer. So it's a bit more natural. And then here we can go back up to our first room at exit 3, which should take us, when I map the dictionary for the exits, back to here at entry point 3. So this is how I set it up in tiled to make it manageable, so you can create your rooms, and that way you can build an open world game and just map any exit to any room however you want. And it's scalable, you can have as many exits as you want. So obviously there's infinite numbers. And let's close tiled down for a minute. So I did draw this earlier, but I don't think I need it now. I think I explained it okay. This is obviously the room size, 4 room size for my level 0, level room 0. We're going to go in here into level 1 and then into level 2 and back up into level 0. So hope that makes sense. Let's start coding it. So in my settings, I've created a new dictionary here called scene data when we go into different scenes or rooms, levels. That's 3 names we've got for it now. Technically it's a scene, isn't it? So in this dictionary, the keys are our different scenes, and the value is a dictionary. And that dictionary has the exit number as the key and the new room, scene, or level that it goes to. And then that will literally send it to, so that if you're in room 0 and you hit exit 1, exit 1 has the value paired to it as as 1, so it will take you to here, scene room level 1, at entry point 1. So the entry points aren't in here, but obviously we already know that because the exit we hit was 1, which gives it the entry point. And we need to code this. So I hope that makes sense. That's how I've done it. There might be a much simpler way of doing it, but this is how I solved it. And it took me a while to get my head around it at first, but when I did, it's quite easy to follow and sort of understand. And we can just put a simple function to do this and just create some sprites for the exits that we can collide with. So let's do it. So let's go to our state where our scene is. I want to create another sprite group and we'll call it exit sprites. And then I'm just going to create a collider object. So if I go into my objects here, I don't really need this layer or a surface. It's not going to be visible. So let's copy this, overwrite it. We'll call it a collider. We'll keep it as a sprite. We want groups. So we want to put it into our exit sprites groups. And we don't need that. We do need the size. And we need the name, which would be the number of the exit from tiled that we can get. So we give them numbers for the exits as a string. So that would be the name. Let's call it number. Okay. So obviously we have to have an image and a rectangle for the sprite. And that will just be the size. So pass a tuple into there. Correct. Top left is equal to the position that we're going to pass in. And start number is equal to the number. And that's all we need for that, I think. So we'll go back into state from objects, import object wall. We want to import the collider as well. Let's not forget that. I always seem to when importing these. Then what did I do now I need to import that layer. So there are the layers in a create scene. Just a quick one here. When we create the player, I want the player basically I don't want the camera to always follow the player. I want it to follow the target. So while we're here, let's instantiate a self.target, which will be the camera target as the player. So initially, when the level loads, it will be on the player, and we can then change this target. So if we're doing cutscenes, we can change the target, and the camera will slowly pan towards it, given that we've got that delay in our camera. If you follow the camera class, the camera tutorial that we did earlier, got the player here, we can just change that to target. And now that should continue to work. So let's run it and just make sure that the camera's... Yep. So basically the player is the target. So let's just prove that. If input space self.target is equal to self.npc. So that should mean the camera will switch to the NPC. Otherwise, it's the player. So that should just flick between them if I just put that. I'm just putting that there just to show you this working. So let's run our game. It should flick to the NPC. Yep, there we go. So no matter what I do with the player now, running all over the place, the camera's just focusing on the NPC. Still obviously moves a bit with the mouse, but I quite like that. It's quite dynamic. And if I press spacebar again, it will flick to the player. And again, I haven't cancelled the space. Let's quickly do that. Otherwise, when I'm holding it, thinks it's trying to flick. So there we go. Every time I press space, it flicks between them. Lovely. That's from before. Technically, we should have put that in the camera tutorial. Let's go back, get rid of that. We don't need that. That just shows you that that's working. So where were we? We need to put our exits as well as our entries. So let's copy this down. Exits in layers, which it will be. We don't need the if. We just need instance of the collider. So we had the groups, so self.exit sprites. And we had the position tuple for the top left. And I think we had the size, which would be a tuple, width, object height, and the number, which was the object dot number. However, here, because we're calling it from the TMX data, we need name. So the number, we're going to pass the name through because it's a string. So if you look in tiled, that exit here, go across here, this is called name. So you can access these properties, access the width and the height, for example, the X and the Y. We can give it a name. Okay. So that should work. But we need it to do something when we collide. So that's instantiated those. So let's make it do something. So because this is unique to the player, you can put it in the state class, but there's going to be, in the scene class, but there's going to be a lot of functions here in the end, because this is where everything's instantiated really. So let's go to our player, and because it's unique to the player, I'm going to put the logic for colliding with them in here. So let's call it exit scene. Then we'll loop through the exit sprites. So for exit in scene.exit sprites, self.hitbox collider exit, right? And we're going to create self.scene.new scene. So we're going to create a new scene variable for our current scene. And that's going to be, if you remember in our settings, whatever scene we're in, it's the value of the exit. So we collide with the exit number, and then the value gives us our new. So scene data at the position of the current level, at the key of the exit we collide with, and that will output the value here, which would be the new scene. So I hope that makes sense. So here, we've got the dictionary scene data. And then remember it's a string, that the current scene is. So we need to change it to an integer. Self.scene.current scene. And then at the position of the exit number. Again, integer because it's passed through as a string. Exit.number. So remember the variable was number. And then we also need the new entry point, which is a bit easier. Hopefully you know what this is going to be. So the new entry point. The entry point's not being used only when instantiated, so you can just write over the current entry point variable and it will just take that by default as we pass it through. So of course that's just exit.number. So that just maps for the exit number, the new entry point. Just bear that in mind when you're creating it in tiled. Can get a little bit confusing sometimes, or at least it does for me, or did. So I'm going to create a transition in the scene. So I want it to nicely fade out from a black screen, sorry, when I enter the new level. So this for now is just going to set the scene transition exiting variable to true, and then we can put that logic in the transition. So it's adaptable to different things, so it doesn't always have to go to another scene, it could go to a different class. It just means that this transition is true, and then it will do something, and it will call something, but we're going to call that in the transition, which we're going to create soon. So obviously this needs to run all the time. It needs to be looked for all the time, whether the player is exiting, so we can just put it straight into the update. So at the minute, it's just inheriting the update of the NPC or characters. So let's do our players update function because we're going to have a couple of additional things. So get direction, I think we had. Let's have a look what we did have. So let's copy these down, change state and state update. So direction, let's put it here. Self.exit scene. And that's going to look for that all the time when they collide. Okay. So let's go back to our scene class. So the scene, when it's instantiated, needs to know the scene and the entry point, scene number and the entry point. So we'll just pass a couple of variables in here, current scene number and the entry point number. Then self.current scene is the current scene we pass through. Self.entry point is the entry point that we pass through. And then if you remember, we had a splash screen which calls the scene. So this is what starts the scene. So now we're not just passing game through to scene, we have to pass the current scene and the entry point. So to begin with, what I usually do for my save data is I have a dictionary in settings, and then I'll just update that dictionary with all my variables in, like the current level, the current entry point, etc. So you generally just start this off with that dictionary item, and then you can write in and out that file as a JSON to make it easy to save load data. Maybe we'll get round to that tutorial soon, but we're way off that yet. So let's just get it working for now. So for now, we just want to pass through the string. Scene is 0. And if you remember, our first entry point was 0. This is where I want the player to appear. So that is also 0. So, and then that should pass through. So we had the transition. The player exit scene. We had this self.scene transition. So let's create this. For now, let's just show that it works. So let's say, let's comment this out. Go to scene. And let's create this method in our scene. Create scene. Now we want go to scene. What do we want to happen here? We want to create a class of the scene. See, our game is being passed in. We want to pass the self.new scene because this would only be called once the player does this, and therefore it will instantiate the self.new scene for the scene, and the scene entry point will be this. So the entry point will change by default when we collide, so that would be updated. And I think, if I remember, we just have to enter state there so it knows to go to that. So let's try that out. So basically up here in the player, we're colliding with the exits. And when it collides, it updates the new scene number, it updates the entry point, and then it will create this go to scene and create the new scene. It will call this, and we'll have a new scene created. And the player should just appear at the relevant position. So if I go here and hit 1, exit 1, in my dictionary, that will map to entry point 1 will be level 1, sorry, so it'll take you to this level at entry point 1 here, so it should take me out here, and same here, so hitting 2 should be mapped to level 2, which would take me out to exit 2. So let's run it. Hopefully I've not done too much code and it's going to... Okay, so it's working, but is anything happening when I hit... Okay, something happens. So it collides, but it goes back. Let's see what we're doing wrong here. Okay. So what's happening here? Sorry, I took a break. It took me a while to figure this one out, actually. In our scene, it's calling the scene, but obviously when it gets to here, it's still loading the same data from scene 0. So that's why. So in here, we just want to make this an F string, so we can just put a data type in curly braces here of the self.current scene. So that's the folder. We want to call from that folder, which would be 0, and we want that 0.tmx to begin with, but then when it changes scene, it will pass these details through and it will call the relevant one. So let's try that now. Okay. Nope. Scene object has no attribute player. So why is this? I know why this is. It's nothing to do with that targeting player. It's because it hasn't got the relevant data. So if I go to my camera, I think I recall, yep, same here. So it's still finding the scene size. So because it's not wide enough, that second scene, it's only one room wide, it's missing the player data that's somewhere over to the right because it's kind of in the middle of our first room. So it's trying to use this CSV file from the previous room. So I just need to take this here, pop this in here, let's make it an F string so we can call those different data types. And now, no, because this needs to be seen. So we've passed the scene into here. Now he says confidently, no, still no attribute player. So here, fundamental this one. So if the object name is 0, so it's still trying to find the string of 0. When we go in here, we haven't got 0 in the entries, so there is no player instantiated. So this needs to be the entry point that's passed through. Obviously, that's why we passed the entry point in. So that should be, again, confident this will work now. There we go. And then this should just work all the time. If I go back, it should go into the other scene. There we go. A little bit delay on that camera as the camera starts from the very top left of the level. So here is perfect. And then as we go down here, that takes us to that single screen. So obviously the camera is fixed to the max width and height. And if we go up, it takes us back to 0. Room 0. There we go. So yeah, with the camera just coming from the top left, if you enter in the bottom right with it panning across, you can just set the initial camera position to the offset relative to the player. You can do that in your camera. For now, I just want a smooth sort of black fade out as I go into the next room. So I'm going to do this by putting in another file now. So let me just prove that. Fine, once more, dash over here. Yeah, works perfect. Fantastic. So, Control N, I think, for a new file. Or save as. And we're going to call this transition. .py. And then Pygame. So let's import all. And to transition, simple class. Put some init variables in there. Just going to pass the scene in. I want to reference things in the scene. So here, I want a fade surface. And that will just be a standard Pygame surface. Size of width and height of the screen. That's all we need. Don't want to make it bigger than it needs to be. I'm going to instantiate the scene. That's going to be equal to the scene that we passed through. This is what we mentioned earlier. We've got a variable called exiting, which is false to begin with. And then we're going to give it a speed. This is just going to set this to 200 for now. And then an alpha value. So we're going to change that alpha value from 0 to 255. Just for the black to fade out, this black surface. Obviously by default, this is obviously black unless you give it a fill color. So when you first go into the scene. The alpha is 255, which means it will be fully black. So I'll give this an update method. And in here, with self.exiting, we're going to call the scenes go to scene function. And if we're not exiting, then self.alpha, we just want to minus from that 255. So we'll do the minus fade speed, remember to times by dt to make it frame rate independent, delta time. And a draw method. And then so here, we're going to call this update and draw in the scene. So this happens in the scene. So initially we're going to fill it with black. We've got our dictionary of colors, so we can call that. And then we set the alpha. Remember, this is happening on every frame. Self.fadeSurf set alpha, and that's going to be our alpha variable, which is being decreased by this every frame as soon as we enter the room, if we're not exiting. And then we need to actually put it onto the screen. So the screen that we're passing here, screen.blit, and we want to blit the fade surface at position 0, 0. So this has no offset, it's just a simple class. So that 0, 0 will always be the top left of the screen. And I think that's all we need for this. So we can import that into our class and we don't really have to worry about this. So let's go into the scene, we can import this. So firstly, from transition, import transition class. And then here we can actually instantiate it. We'll call it self.transition equals an instance of transition. And we're going to pass the scene into there, because if you remember, let's move that here. If you remember, we passed the scene into it. So that's good. And we just need to call the update and draw on this. So update. Then we're going to draw it on top of everything in our camera. Remember, this will draw in order on top of each other. Debugger doesn't matter for now. That can be on top, so that's not going to be in the complete game, is it? So draw screen. So now if we go to our player and we had the exit scene, instead of calling this now, we can use what we did before that we commented out. So the scene's transition class, exiting variable, we're going to make it true. So when we collide with the exit sprite, we'll make that true. And then any logic, whether it be a different scene or a menu, etc., you can just change it in here and do some if-else statements here. I tend to find I only do a few, whether it be main menus or an end screen or a cutscene, for example. So generally you can use this just to tidy that kind of logic up. Otherwise it'll be the standard go-to scene for your open world. So back in here we've got the transition update. So now what that should do is, by default the scene will load. You'll have the black fade surface. It will gradually fade out by default. And then when you go to the new scene, when you hit the exit, this exiting variable will be true. It will call this, which is here, and then bang, you'll have a new scene and it will fade in again. So let's try that and see if that works. There we go. Lovely. So you could just see it fade in there. And here? No, it doesn't. No attribute seen. Did you mean keen? So obviously I've made a spelling error here somewhere. Self.scene, go to scene. So it's here. Self.scene, not keen. Instantiate instead. There we go. Lovely black fade in there. And then here, lovely. Same again. Yeah. And then there we go. We go into different levels just like that. And again, we'll go up here. Okay, you can make it a little bit more dynamic as well and a bit nicer, add a bit more production value. If you go back into transition, you can have a nice fade out effect as well. And you can do all that here. So, how did I do this? So, if it's exiting after alpha is equal to minimum, whichever is smaller from these two variables. So, see? So that's going to be the smallest of these. So obviously that's going to be from 0 plus the fade speed when it gets more than 255. So it fades out to black. When it reaches black, this will now return that because the alpha will be higher than that. And then alpha is more than or equal to 255. We will then go to the scene. Otherwise, we can actually just do a max function here. Whichever is bigger, this will return. This will stop the fade speed going over 255 or under. So otherwise, this will return the max. So this will always be bigger as the decreases the alpha value. And then when it reaches 0, it will then be smaller because it will be a minus number and it will return 0. So it will stay at 0. So max and min functions are worth understanding. They can make your code a lot neater. So that should work. So it should fade out and fade in and should look a little bit nicer. Let's check it out. So that's fading out. There we go. There we go, working. So when it does fade out, obviously you can move the player around again, as you can see here. So as it collides, I think when I made my game, I just made the character go into a different state. So it returned a value of exiting for the player, and that just put the player into just a running state, and it takes the movement function out. So the player just carries on moving like that, just to give a bit of realism. But for now, that should be everything you need, and you can adjust it to how you want it. Okay, thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you on the next one. Questions are welcome in the comments, as always.